This is W.I.P, a game about making the game I'm making. I made this in a week using Bitsy for Bitsy Jam 3, based on the theme Daydream. And so we start off in my flat. I am actually sat right here as I speak. So Bitsy, you only have 3 colors per screen. You have a background color, a kind of foreground color, and then an interactables color, which is really interesting. Like, I had a lot of fun drawing so much really low res pixel art where you only have 1 color per sprite. It started with a jam, Fishing Jam 2. I spent 4 evenings and 1 weekend making a little fishing puzzle game in Pico 8. I really liked it. Commuting on the train, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd made so many tiny projects. Maybe this was finally the one that was good enough to be a full thing, a real game. Maybe I could do that. I kept working on the game for a couple of months. Soon the calendar rolled over to the new year. I planned to release it soon to the Pico 8 community. At some point, a friend from uni asked if I was working on anything and needed audio. Soon he was making music and sound effects. It was great working together again. Most of my dinners were just crappy, stick-it-in-the-oven affairs. I'd rather spend time working than learning to cook. Same as uni, really. I pretty much stopped playing games. I was too busy making my own. It was more fun. And so this screen is kind of a mock of the game this game is about. So because it was on Pico 8, the resolution was 128 by 128, which is the same as Bitsy. So all of these sprites are actually sprites from my game, but just changed to be only 1 color, because that's what Bitsy supports. I'd always wanted to draw pixel art, but it was just too daunting to start. Pico 8 removed those barriers by having a fixed 16 color palette and a resolution of just 128 by 128. I was really happy with how many mechanics there were and the many ways they interacted. Mechanics and themes supported each other surprisingly well. I'd never tried to make a puzzle game before. I found I loved thinking about level design, about what I want the player to think about and how to encourage that to happen. Some of the code was pretty interesting too. This was the first project where I was actually hitting all the memory limitations of Pico 8. Coming up with ways to squeeze more into the cart was hard and fun. I imagine that's what game dev felt like all the time, originally. Hearing the bleeps and bloops my friend added suddenly made it feel like a real game. It was happening, and it was good. Eventually I started to dream even bigger. What if I ported to mobile? Then people outside the Pico 8 community could play too. Late on January 2nd, I found an engine called Defold. They were running a ridiculous competition where 6 winning games would get to go to GDC in San Francisco. It had already been running for a while. The deadline was in 20 days. I decided to go for it. Both Defold and Pico 8 were Lua based. I thought I could copy and paste most of the code, but ended up rewriting the entire game from scratch. I spent the first week learning the new engine, the second week porting most of the gameplay, and the third week doing UI, polish, and new levels. Somehow, I finished in time. Rubbish piled up quickly because I was having so much takeaway delivered. I hated that the drivers clearly recognized me. I even ask about the unwashed dishes. Laundry was piling up too. Even the 5 minutes it would take to load the machine felt like wasted, crucial time. I was spending a gross amount of time inside at a computer. I worked all day at a computer, then went home and worked all night. I was actually working more hours a week at home on my fishing game than I was at my full-time job. I think it came out to around 90 hours a week. I stopped reading on the train to give my eyes a break. Started napping from exhaustion instead. A week later, we actually won. We were going to be demoing our game at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. I had another 3 weeks to get the game ready. Often, after crossing off another day, I would lean against the wall and just stare at the calendar. I had a big August to August year planner, so I could physically see all the time I'd spent on this game, right back to the jam. I could also see the rapidly decreasing time I had left. Besides making the game, there was also loads of admin. I had to arrange flights and hotels, buy a suitcase, make business cards, stickers, practice my pitch. I even drafted a contract between my audio friend and I, since suddenly we might make some money. Those were the most productive 3 weeks of my life. Before the competition, we had 12 levels. By the time I got on the plane, we had 30, including 3 boss puzzles and several new mechanics, plus a whole mobile version. I worked even longer hours in the second 3-week crunch than the first. I was even designing levels on the train. Something had to give. First it was sleep, then it was work, but I made it. It was worth it. London. Despite living here for almost 5 months now, I had still barely explored it and hadn't done any of the touristy stuff. Too busy working. I hadn't flown since I was a kid, couldn't ever remember it. I made sure to book a window seat, then stared and stared. Next to me was an American woman who had travelled all over the world and to almost every US state. She told me a lot of lovely stories. I told her about the competition, about why I was going to America. Despite only meeting a few hours ago, she said she was proud of me. I believed her. I couldn't have asked for a better travelling companion. My new airborne friend pointed out a mountain as we flew over. She said it was the first bit of the USA that the sun reached each day. She said there's always a few dozen people up there waiting for the sunrise, and they all cheer when it arrives. I really like that story. Chicago. I had a couple days alone here before the train left for San Francisco. It's pretty scary exploring a city in a different country on your own. I decided to visit the aquarium. It seemed appropriate. About a month before hearing about the competition, I almost accidentally bought a ticket for Train Jam. I figured they'd be sold out. I wasn't actually expecting to get one. And so I met up with several hundred other game devs in Chicago, and we pulled out of the station, due to arrive in San Francisco 52 hours later with a whole bunch of new games. I wasn't expecting the scenery to be so stunningly distracting. We passed through woods, deserts, brush, mountains, what looked like Mars, deeper snow than I've ever seen. We followed frozen rivers and emerged from tunnels with blinding views of frozen lakes far below. It was magical. I'm not great at socializing. I had been working insane solitary hours for 6 weeks, then flew 4,000 miles alone to a city and country I'd never visited. I explored Chicago alone for 2 days, then suddenly found myself in a room, then a train, with hundreds of inspiring, collaborating, total strangers. I wish I could have met more people, made deeper connections, but I was already running on empty. I was thousands of miles outside of my comfort zone. I just didn't have it in me. San Francisco. I would be exploring alone again for a few days, then meeting up with my audio friend as though we were international businessmen. Another close friend got to come too, since the competition was flights and accommodation for 3 people per game. Crazy. I'm ashamed of just how much time I spent in our hotel room. By day I was exhibiting my own game at GDC, an unlikely dream since I first heard of the event something like 8 years prior. But every night I bailed early or didn't even attempt the dozens of amazing parties and meetups happening between thousands of my peers and idols. This was both deeply frustrating and by now far beyond my control. The last night of GDC, my two friends went to different parties while I ate overpriced chocolate from the snack bar. A while after my roommate returned, I was getting really worried that neither of us had heard from our other friend, who had her own room. No reply. I redressed to head for reception. They didn't remember anyone like my description, but would call our room if she returned. Her phone's room rang and rang. In our room, trying in vain to recall the name of the place, of anyone who went. Back in reception, about to wander the streets, and the room just rings and rings and rings. Hello? She sounded sleepy. People seemed to really like the game. I'd spent a lot of time doing design iterations on those first few levels, trying to make it so that players would work out the mechanics for themselves. Thankfully, it seemed to be working. I was so shocked every time someone recognized the game from Twitter. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that I was meeting people in San Francisco from all over the world who had not only seen this thing I was making in my tiny London flat, but actually remembered it and were excited to play it. All of the Train Jam games share a booth at GDC too, so technically at 22 I had 2 games on display at my first ever GDC. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's still pretty crazy. I wish I'd been able to explore more, but the booth was busy almost all the time. On the last day I swapped passes with friends so I could attend a talk. It was funny seeing in real life the podium and curtains that I've seen in so many videos. Levels 5 and 10 were the only major issues. I redesigned 5 daily, but still had to walk people through it. Level 10, the first boss, was just a mess. Bosses were an untested idea that I had crammed in during crunch without time for review. 2 months later, a shower epiphany finally gave me a good 5. I got 10 the day after, to my great relief. My favourite part was the Independent Games Festival and Game Developers' Choice Awards. Watching so many of the game makers that I admire and aspire to be like be recognized and rewarded for their work. I couldn't stop thinking about just who was in that room. I mean, Tim Schafer was presenting. Campo Santo, Playdead, Blendo Games, Thekla, Naughty Dog, Sony, Blizzard, id Software, not to mention the audience. After GDC, we had one day together in San Francisco before flying back. We got one of the old trams over to Pier 39 and bought American junk food and watched sea lions jostling. It was really nice. And then I was back to my little flat, back to work. I took a long break from working on my game to just emotionally recover, I guess. Eventually I picked it up again and addressed my pages of notes from GDC. A large part of why I'm making this game is that I'm learning so much in the process. I want to be as inclusive as possible, so I paid a company to localize the text into 12 languages. Then I rearranged every screen in every language. It was a lot of work, and here I'm going to butcher some pronunciations. C'était beaucoup de travail. Eso era mucho trabajo. Eso ein mung habit. Era un saco de lavoro. Foi muito trabalho. But I'm so glad I did it. Sometimes I look at how big my to-do list is and panic, but then I look at how much I've already done. I don't care if this game makes any money, I like my job. I just want it to be as good as I know I can make it, and for at least a few people to enjoy it. Sometimes, on the train, I daydream about one day releasing the game, then seeing a stranger next to me pull out their phone and start playing. I really hope they have fun. It's really incredible how many things I've done, and places I've seen, and people I've met because of this little game I'm making. Maybe one day I'll release it and get to do even more. Thanks for playing.